In October 2018, Sears filed for bankruptcy. It had once been the largest retailer in the United States, one of the most powerful companies in American business for generations. Something unusual had happened inside the company long before that filing. Years earlier, its own chief executive had split the business into more than 30 separate units and told them to compete against each other for capital, the way separate companies would. Departments inside the same stores negotiated prices with each other. Some refused to share basic information. Business units that should have been working together spent their energy protecting their own numbers instead. By the time Sears collapsed, it hadn't just lost to Walmart or Amazon. Part of it had spent over a decade fighting itself. To understand how that happened, the story has to start decades earlier. Sears began in 1893 as a mail-order catalog business, founded by Richard Sears and Alva Roebuck. For most of the 20th century, it was the largest retailer in the country. The catalog brought clothing, tools, appliances, furniture, and even entire prefabricated houses to customers across America, decades before anyone had heard of online shopping. Sears eventually became much more than a retailer. By 1973, the company was successful enough to build its own headquarters in Chicago, the Sears Tower, the tallest building in the world when it opened. The tower was only one symbol of how powerful Sears had become. The company owned Allstate, one of the largest insurance companies in America. It owned Dean Witter, a major financial services firm. It launched the Discover credit card. For decades, Sears wasn't just a store. It was one of the largest and most diversified businesses in the country. Then, slowly, the business began to lose its way. Walmart was becoming more efficient. Specialized retailers were taking market share. The traditional department store model was weakening. Sears still had enormous assets, famous brands, thousands of stores, and valuable real estate underneath them. What it increasingly lacked was the ability to manage all of it as one coherent business. In 2005, a hedge fund manager named Eddie Lampert entered the story. He had already gained control of Kmart through his investment fund and engineered a merger between Kmart and Sears. The combined company became Sears Holdings, with Lampert as chairman, later taking over as CEO directly. Lampert didn't bring traditional retail thinking to Sears. He brought a theory that internal competition, modeled on free market economics, could make the company more efficient than centralized management ever could. The logic sounded reasonable on paper. In a normal market, companies compete for customers and capital, and the strongest ones survive while the weakest lose resources. Lampert's answer was to build that same system inside a single corporation. He divided Sears into more than 30 separate business units, covering apparel, tools, appliances, home services, and online sales, among others. Each one had its own leadership, its own profit and loss statement, its own targets, and its own incentive to protect its own numbers above everything else. The company was no longer managed as one giant retailer. It was increasingly managed as a collection of smaller businesses that happened to share a name. The idea was that competition would create discipline. Instead, something else began to happen. The units didn't just operate separately. They negotiated with each other, the way outside companies negotiate with a retailer. A unit that wanted to advertise across the store could be charged for access to another unit's space. A department that wanted to use another department's customer data might have to negotiate for it, and some units refused to share basic information at all, because helping Sears as a whole didn't necessarily help their own individual numbers, and their own numbers were what they were judged on. That created a dangerous incentive inside a company with one customer, one brand, and one store, where internally the business had started behaving like dozens of separate companies competing for the same money. The theory was supposed to make Sears more efficient. Instead, it quietly destroyed the cooperation a retailer actually depends on. A store isn't simply a collection of departments. It's a system where inventory, employees, website, brands, advertising, and physical location work together to create one customer experience. Sears was increasingly treating that system as a pile of independent assets instead. While this internal competition played out, the stores themselves were falling apart. Sears needed investment in modernization, better merchandise, and a better customer experience. But the company was under growing financial pressure, and capital kept getting directed toward financial priorities instead of rebuilding the stores. Across the country, Sears and Kmart locations became known for peeling paint, empty shelves, outdated interiors, and equipment that went unrepaired for years. The problem wasn't that the stores looked old. The problem was that the company was steadily losing the reason customers had to walk in at all. This is where the real estate story becomes important, because Sears owned something extremely valuable: the land underneath many of its stores. In 2015, Sears spun off a large share of that real estate into a separate company called Seritage Growth Properties, and began leasing back many of its own store locations from Seritage instead of owning them outright. The transaction gave Sears cash, and it also changed the economics of the business. Properties that had once sat as assets on the balance sheet now created ongoing rent obligations instead. The situation grew more complicated because Eddie Lampert personally held a significant stake in Seritage. The same real estate that had once anchored Sears' value was now part of a separate financial structure that Sears' own CEO had personally invested in. This is where the difference between financial engineering and business building becomes clear. A sale-leaseback can be a smart tool. McDonald's famously built part of its fortune on real estate, using property to support a growing operating business and help its restaurant network expand. At Sears, the same tool seemed to run in reverse. Instead of using assets to build a stronger retailer, the company was using assets to generate cash while the underlying business kept deteriorating. One approach uses assets to build the future. The other uses assets to pay for the present. Sears was running out of future. By 2018, the situation had become impossible to hide. Stores were closing, sales were falling, debt remained a heavy burden, and the company's most valuable assets had already been used repeatedly to raise cash. On October 15, 2018, Sears Holdings filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The story didn't end there. Eddie Lampert's own fund, ESL Investments, bid for what remained of the company and won. The man whose decisions many had blamed for Sears' decline ended up owning what was left of it after the collapse. What emerged wasn't the old Sears. The public company, the diversified empire built across a century, was gone. What remained was a smaller collection of stores and brands, not restored so much as dismantled and rebuilt from whichever pieces still seemed worth owning. Sears didn't fail simply because Walmart was stronger or Amazon changed what customers expected, though both were true. Part of Sears had stopped competing in the marketplace altogether. It was too busy competing with itself. A system built to import the discipline of a market into a single company ended up destroying the one thing a company has that a market doesn't: a reason for its own parts to work together. A retailer isn't just a collection of assets. The store, the brand, the customer relationship, and the people running it all create value through the connections between them, not in isolation. Break those connections deliberately in the name of efficiency, and each individual piece may keep its price tag, while the business built around it quietly comes apart. That's what happened to Sears. It had valuable brands, valuable real estate, and a famous name worth billions. It lost the ability to turn any of that into a healthy operating business, because too much of what it owned had become something to extract rather than something to build on.